doing a learning team with a customer, and I thought I would do a video about learning teams because I think a lot of people talk about them and they've become very, very commercialised, which, you know, I get, everyone's got to make a buck, right? But it's kind of like, I don't know, it's become a little bit like we've got a little bit of a silver bullet syndrome like everything else. So yeah, I thought I'd make a video about the ethos of it, the idea of it, and how we do them, because there's no one kind of way to do it. Let's get into the video and I shall tell you some more about it. Learning teams kind of came from the influx of human organisational performance, high reliability, all stuff like that. They kind of came along the same time, because around the same time, kind of learning organisations are kind of from the same area and kind of place. Now, you could probably go back and find an academic history of them if you wanted to, but ultimately, it's all part of the same pack. Now, loads of people are kind of selling them as only one way to do them, which I don't think is really fair. I understand why people do that, I get it, you know, we've all got to make a buck and stuff, and some people might have a better way than others. But I think when we bring it back down to the root of what it actually is. Sorry, I've got to have a coffee, I'm getting knackered. I say that, but it's totally a placebo because this is decaf. Instagram breakfast has gone down the shitter. But if we take learning teams back to what the basics, right, of what we're trying to achieve here. They're a conversational based exercise facilitated by somebody that's got the ability to kind of get the best out of people in a way, like kind of get a really good conversation going, promote a sense of psychological safety. It's in a room of people that you've got a reasonable level of cognitive diversity. Like I say, it's quite psychologically safe, but ultimately in that room is people doing the work on the shop floor, and you're all having a conversation around something, trying to get as much data and as much information about the reality of work and the challenges of work to find yourself things to improve on, e.g. what works well and what doesn't work well. And really, in a nutshell, that's it. And there are many different ways to do it, and I do think they slightly tweak depending on when you're doing them. Are you doing them like proactively? Are you doing them after an incident? Are you doing like pre-mortems? And the way we look at it is that there's loads of different ways to do them, but ultimately they're just data gathering exercises, and all the ways to do that data gathering exercise are just tools at the buffet. That's how we think about it. Don't overthink this. It's get data gathering exercise, learning exercise, whatever you want to call it, with a room of people, and you're trying to facilitate a conversational based exercise to gather data about the work and reality. That's it. So when you take it back to its original roots, or maybe not roots, but like aim, you can really start to focus on how you can do it, and not what book do I need to buy, what course do I need to go on, so that you can find the silver way to do learning teams. Oh, I can't do learning teams until Bob showed me how to do it, for example. Now, I better go get ready, because I do actually have to go to this client zone. Oh my god, it's cold. Oh shit. Fucking hell, I'm trying to leave on fucking time. Right, second time lucky. Oh, we're actually on time. So if you focus on what you're originally intended to do, which is just have a conversation, run a conversation-based exercise focused on gathering data that gives you an insight into the reality of the working world. Really, that's it in a nutshell. It doesn't matter whether you have a sponsor, don't have a sponsor, whether you do it with 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, even though I think too many people can make a bit of a difference. Doesn't matter whether you call it a freaking learning team, bloody chat, whatever. It doesn't matter. All of that stuff does not matter. What we're trying to do is achieve a kind of group of people that feel psychologically safe to talk up, so we can get as much data and as much insight as possible into the real working world. That is a learning team. You don't need a book, you don't need a freaking course or anything like that. Continental. To do it. That's it. So I did mention pre-mortem, so let's talk about pre-mortems then. You can kind of work it out yourself, right? A post-mortem is a person has died, I suppose, but in our context, after something has gone wrong, where we kind of delve deep into the body, so to speak, and try and find out what actually happened, right? A pre-mortem, it's kind of the same, but the opposite way around, and no one's dead yet. So how do you do that? Pre-mortems are mostly focused on trying to find out the most possible way that something's going to fail, right? So it's basically asking a group of people a very simple question. If something big was going to go wrong, what would it be and how would it happen? In a nutshell, that's kind of it. There are loads of really creative ways to do it. I've done it where we stole this off Peter Jenkins, or we put a newspaper article, and we took a newspaper article, did this thing that I can't remember how to do anymore, but you did this thing with a code on the web page, and it basically means you can change all the writing on the page, so you can kind of take a page of the Sun and you can write whatever headline you want on it. So we nicked this idea of Peter Jenkins, we did that, we put the company's name on it, and then we put it on there, and it said like, insert company name here, director to go to court for major disaster, or something like that, right? And then we said, right, as a room, why has this happened? We want to go away, think about it, and come back, and then as a room, we're all going to discuss the ways that we think that could happen. And then once we do that, you pick one of them, and then you do another one the other time, because obviously you can't cover them all. It's about having in-depth conversations about one thing and learn as much as possible. So you would pick one of the things that people come up with, and you would go, right, let's double down on that. So you're basically asking the question, what could go wrong and how will it go wrong? So then when you simplify it down to its simplest thing, what could go wrong and how will it go wrong, you start to bring that down to a pre-job brief. You're talking about your task, you're doing a pre-job brief in that task. Get the people to start asking questions like, what could go wrong and how will it go wrong? And that's a pre-mortem in a nutshell. Right, I'm going to drive to the clients, and then we'll crack on, and I'll tell you some more. I'll probably on the way home / when I get home, we'll do the rest of the video on the learning teams. So one of the first things we do in the session is we go through a kind of a variation on the HOP principles, in a way, in that we talk about kind of behaviour exists within context. Blame ultimately is not what we're looking for, which I try to avoid getting into the blame conversation, because you go a bit down a rabbit hole, be there forever. So we just kind of talk about how what we're looking for is the context from the behaviours. We talk about how you respond matters from 2 contexts, 2 points of view, how you respond to people saying stuff in the room today, and then we talk about how you respond holistically kind of throughout business, how you respond to people making errors and so on, can shut down psychological safety and so on and so forth. And then from there we do like a warm-up exercise where we pick an error or something that's gone wrong, and we kind of talk about the 4 factors that contribute to human performance: cultural, human, organisational and situational. That's just kind of a risk fluent variation on lots of models out there. So we put that like across like that, and then we just go around the room one at a time, getting one idea that might contribute to that error happening. And no one's allowed to really challenge anyone else on that point. Like, no matter what you say, it's acceptable and accepted. This is just kind of warm people up and get used to just thinking differently about this stuff. once that we've done that kind of warm-up exercise, and don't really want to spend too long on that, it is just a warm-up exercise. If the customer's not really giving us a lot of time or something like that, and that we still want to get a lot of context out of something, typically that's a really good exercise. Also a really good exercise if you're just focusing on one error and you really want to pull out the context of a human error, that's a really good exercise. Mostly what we're trying to do is just warm people up and get them used to thinking about things with the broader kind of contributing factors perspective, if that makes sense, and to get people comfortable talking and so on and so forth. We allow people to pass in that process, so anyone can pass whenever they want, and then we pretty much, depending on how it goes, we pretty much end the exercise when everybody passes in a row. However, if it doesn't work as simple as that, then just keep going, just play the room, you know, get a vibe for what it feels like as you go through the exercise. So it depends on the size of the group as well. That's the warm-up exercise. Once you've done the warm-up exercise, the next point of what we would do is we would pick a task, pick something we want to focus on. You might have done this prior to your session, you might do it in your session. Really depends on the relationship with the customer, be that internal customer, external customer, doesn't matter. But with the organization, you might know what you're walking into, what you want to focus on, and that's fine. So you pick the process. Once you pick the process you want to focus on, the task you want to focus on, whatever, you want to timeline it out. Now I find the best way to do this is with post-its on the wall. If you want to do it tech, you don't want to have paper, that's a fair enough thing to worry about. Miro can be quite good, or some of the other versions of Miro are very good as well. You can use that. This typically gets huge. I mean, I'm going to play a couple of clips as I'm talking of, you know, one example from a learning exercise that I've done. You'll start to see how quickly this grows into just a wall of post-its. So yeah, you would timeline the process. Once you're comfortable with the timeline, then the trick with the timeline is not go too in depth, but don't go too broad either. And I know that's really hard to pull out what you actually do, but you've got to just keep doing it to get a knack for it. Like, you don't want to be going right down into the rabbit hole, but at the same time you do want to have enough there to play with. And then once you've done that, you want to be pulling out control measures. So control measures, mitigations, doesn't matter, be them organizational stuff, pre-existing stuff, human stuff, like, you know, people's ability, their experiences, you know, whatever it is that contributes to the risk management of that process. Key point here is don't get bogged down at this point in the ones that work well and don't work well. That's the next step. Here you want to be talking about what should happen. So should you have a risk assessment in place? Do you have a risk assessment in place? Yes, we do. Put it in. Okay, cool. Should you have, I don't know, is a machine guarded? Should you have a machine guard? Yeah, but it's not very good. There's lots of bits missing. Doesn't matter. Do you have guarding? Yes, put it on. Great. And just do that and go through the process and keep doing that. I'm going to drive home and I'll tell you the next step. So last bits to think about then. So you've got your timeline, you've got all your mitigations in place, whatever you want to have in there. Try not to be too restricted. There's a kind of an art to it, and I don't think you can get that art from a book or a course. And don't get me wrong, those stuff help, right? But I think you can only learn this by doing it. Like, just do it. If you're in a employed safety job right now, there is no better time than now just to start doing stuff like this. There is a better ways to do it than we do it, 100%. And if there is, right, don't be a shitty and put it in the comments. Like, be nice and put it in the comments. Make a video, make a podcast and tell everybody about it. I think that's good. And there are some people out there doing it. Anyway, so this is kind of the magic bit, right? So you've got all your mitigations in place through your timeline, and typically, depending on how that timeline looks, sometimes you can really see, like we've done it with one client, and you saw all of the safety stuff done right at the beginning of the process. It was a huge front end loaded process, and then the job started and there was just nothing, absolutely nothing. So it was like, we're done safety, crack on. So just by having this visual representation of your process on the wall was really helpful. So then the next part of the process is, and this can take time, so you want to make sure you're blocking out a lot of time. And if you are under time constraints, then I'll give you some tricks in a minute. Go through each individual control measure, mitigation, whatever you've got in there, and ask two very simple questions. What about this works well? What about this doesn't?
does not work well. And then I typically, for work well, I write in green, and then what doesn't work well, write in red. Now, interesting point that popped up today, which I've not come across before, and I hadn't thought about putting in this video, but I will because it came up today. One person in the room didn't really have much positive stuff to say, and he said, I don't have much positive stuff to say about all of the control measures. I don't think we do very well at any of it, but I'm not going to say any more because I feel like I'm being overly negative. And I said, well, we need to remove this negative and positive connotation. Like, we don't really want to think about it like that. Now, obviously, it's easy for what doesn't work well and what does work well to be assigned positive and negative kind of connotations. Red pen, green pen has a negative or good, good and bad connotation to it, or language to it, I suppose. And that's made me think about, do I need to change the language? Do I need to use different color pens or whatever? I use the red and green. Well, yeah, obviously, because that made me think about red is like, we need to focus on this, and green is, this is good. But ultimately, we can still learn from the good. But when I'm doing the admin process behind it, which I'll come to in a minute, where I kind of type up the findings and summarize the report, it's just really easy to see the green and the red, because as you can imagine, it can get really, really messy. So yeah, something for you to think about, something I'm going to ponder on. So we go through and we're going to put all of the control measures on, and I'll put a little clip of today's example on there. We didn't get to do many control measures today because we were running out of time, and I'll put another picture of another one that we've done on the screen now, so you can see what it looks like when we kind of finished it as well. So if you don't have a lot of time, my advice would be ask the room and think for yourself. Discuss as a group, right, we haven't got a lot of time, so I want to pick 2 or 3 or 4 of these mitigations that we have in place, and I want to really focus on those, and I want to spend our time really getting into those. So, don't spend time going through stuff that you think, you know what, we're not going to be able to change that, or do you know what, that's tiny in comparison to this. So pick your battles in a way. If you're under time pressure, that would be my advice. Ideally, how you want to do is do this whole thing, go through each mitigation, type that up in a bit of a report so you can summarize it, send it out to the learning team, and a couple of days later go back in for like a half day and pick a couple of those mitigations or things that you've learned from and try and come up with improvements. In a nutshell, that's a learning team, but don't overcomplicate this, people. It's an exercise where you've got something and you want to learn about what that looks like in reality and how you can improve on that. That's it. So have conversations about what could go wrong. Do it if you're doing it as a pre-mortem style process. If you're doing it as like a proactive process, what works well, what doesn't work well. You keep it as simple as that. Hi guys, for this process, what works well and what doesn't work well. That's it. Post it out. Boom, boom, boom. Cover the wall. Make this as simple, as complex as you want. I'm just giving you one example of how we've done it a lot of times. If you're doing it off the back of an accident, my advice would be start the last critical point, the last point of no return, the last thing that somebody did that started that made the thing go bang, or somebody fell off or whatever. So the incident, start from there and timeline it backwards and do the same process. Insert all the mitigations, insert all the things that might have contributed to that. So your latent errors, your latent conditions, error precursors, all of that stuff, and timeline it back. Do the same thing. What works well, what doesn't work well. That's it. In a nutshell, that's a learning team. Hope you found this video helpful. I'm going to go walk the dog. Catch you next week. Safe.